This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. Russian missiles rained down on two of the largest universities in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv, causing powerful explosions. Thousands flee towns and villages across Europe as high winds fan fires amid a record-breaking heat wave.
Here in the Cube, we'll take a closer look at a report that claims that all the major social media platforms fail at protecting LGBTQ users.
And Spain's king and queen pay tribute to the lives cut short by COVID-19 at a special memorial event. I'm Helena Humphrey, glad you could join us. Rescue operations are underway in Ukraine's port city of Mykolaiv after at least 10 Russian missiles struck two universities and other civil infrastructure. Local officials say that at least 4 people have been injured. Elsewhere, Russian airstrikes hit Kharkiv in the north and 3 districts in the Dnipro region to the east. Meanwhile, 18 people are still missing in the central Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia after missiles hit civilian buildings on Thursday. At least 23 people there are confirmed dead. Well, our correspondent Sasha Vakulina is here with me in the studio. Sasha, yesterday that strike on Vinnytsia tragically killing children. Today, 2 universities in Mykolaiv. Again, here we're seeing civilian infrastructure being targeted. How is this impacting morale, I guess, in Ukraine?
Now, I have to say that the attack on Vinnytsia yesterday was truly heartbreaking for Ukrainian society, for everybody all over Ukraine and beyond Ukrainian borders, of course. Seeing the pictures of the disturbing pictures of that stroller of the kids who died and who got injured, this is, of course, this had a very heartbreaking effect. And this brought the total of children killed during the war to 352 by now. 352 Ukrainian children who died since the full-scale invasion. So, of course, this has a huge impact on the morale of the Ukrainians. But I also have to say that when it comes to Ukrainian military and those who are fighting and defending for Ukraine, this made them very angry, so to say, because they do feel like they have to, no matter what fatigue or exhaustion that they had, of course, now since months of this full-scale war, they feel like they have to defend it even more for those children.
I mean, 352 children, that is a number which bears repeating, and I can see your emotion even saying it. But, you know, there's a pattern here. Schools hit, universities. Mm-hmm. Is this being seen as part of a strategy?
Well, that's the question here, because I've checked now on the numbers, and according to Ukrainian authorities, they will have to rebuild and recover 400 schools and 300 kindergartens. This is, of course, including 152 cultural sites that, according to UNESCO, also religious buildings, historical buildings. This is exactly why that concern is being raised here. But we have to understand also that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, repeatedly said that he does not recognize the existence of Ukraine as a sovereign state. So this is indeed can be seen as an attack on the very essence of Ukrainian culture and heritage and language as well, because in the occupied territories nowadays, all the teachers reportedly, those who stayed there on the occupied territories, they are being forced to change the way they teach at schools, and they have to switch to Russian language, and also they have to switch the whole curriculum into the Russian curriculum program. So all in all, these can be seen as the attack on more than just territory, but also Ukrainian culture and essence of it.
Well, Sasha Vakulina there reporting on another day seeing civilian infrastructure hit in Ukraine. Sasha, as ever, thank you. Well, meanwhile, Russia's defence ministry said that negotiators were close to reaching a deal to unblock grain from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Delegates from Moscow, Kyiv and Ankara met with UN officials in Istanbul this week to discuss the possible resumption of exports. Moscow had previously said that Western sanctions must be relaxed before foreign vessels could resume operations. But Turkey's foreign minister said that a deal was set to be signed next week. Well, straight over then to Galina Polanskaya, who is standing by for us. Galina, good to see you. Hearing news yesterday about potentially positive developments from Turkey when it comes to getting Ukrainian grain out of ports. But what is the Russian government saying about that position on a potential deal?
Well, Russia says that Moscow's proposal on how to resume Ukraine grain exports were largely supported by negotiations at talks, and that the agreement could be seen very soon, but many analysts think actually that we could see some results as early as the next Tuesday on the 19th of July, when President Putin will meet the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in Iran. They are there to talk about Syria officially, but of course it could be expected that they could also discuss the grains, and some analysts believe that Vladimir Putin wants to announce this decision by himself, and surely the next week there will be another round of negotiations. And RIA Novosti, the Russian state agency, says that some diplomatic sources are persuaded that the agreement is very, very close, and some other sources say that what Russia discusses at those talks are sanctions which are not directly linked with the grain problem.
Galina, I have to say that the world was certainly saddened to wake up and hear the news of the British aid worker Paul Urey dying after allegedly being held by Russian-backed separatists. Has that news made its way to Russia?
Really sad news, and Russian state media and state news agencies reported. They spoke about the death of Paul Urey, but of course they are mainly quoting the officials from the self-proclaimed separatist republic, the People's Donetsk Republic, and one of the latest quotes is coming from the foreign minister of this recognized by Russia Republic, who said that the cause of the death was I quote, acute coronary insufficiency. We have heard that it was diabetes and other chronic diseases and stress. And Russian media also quote the foreign secretary of the UK, Liz Truss, who accused Russia of this death and said that it was Russia responsible, but they do not say that Paul was a humanitarian worker. What they say that he was charged of mercenary activities, and those news surely made it through Russia.
All right, Galina Polanskaya there bringing us the latest. Galina, good to talk to you. Thank you. Well, now to Brussels, where the European Commission is taking Hungary to court, accusing Budapest of restricting press freedom and discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. Well, last year, a prominent radio station, Club Radio, was taken off air by Prime Minister Viktor Orbán after the station spoke out against his regime. Well, the Commission's other case is focusing on Hungarian law, which restricts freedom of expression of LGBTQ plus people in the media, similar to the so-called anti-gay propaganda rules in Russia. Budapest claims that the laws are protecting children and defending Christian values. Well, our correspondent Shona Murray is standing by in Brussels. We can bring her in now. Shona, what could this legal case mean for Hungary?
Well, I suppose the Commission wants the legislation to be revoked. That's the ultimate aim. But of course, it could lead to fines if they don't do that. The Commission probably wouldn't be taking this case unless they had pretty strong arguments. As you said, Helena, it relates to this homophobic legislation that prohibits the portrayal or content of LGBTIQ community content to young people, which people say is very offensive. It aligns the LGBT community with paedophilia, and it's also very dangerous to young people who are trying to come out. The other legislation, as you said, is in relation to Club Radio, which affects the right to freedom of expression, and also that the Commission is saying that the decision was disproportionate and discriminatory. So they would like that these decisions are eventually revoked.
Shona, while you're there in Brussels today, I want to ask you about the news coming out of the EU unveiling another round of sanctions against Russia, this time targeting gold exports. How much will that hurt?
Well, the estimates from the US, which started this prohibition of Russian gold, say it's about 12 billion euros or 12 to $15 billion a year for the Russian economy. So it's a huge export. But this is really the maintenance and alignment package that comes from the EU, essentially aligning the EU's sanctions with the rest of the G7. It's also about saying to the world, because there's legislation in there, or at least a line in there to say that none of the sanctions are targeting the agricultural industry or stopping food leaving Ukraine, which is one of the bits of Russian propaganda that we hear about. So this is something that the EU will confirm on Monday amongst member states, because of course the whole thing has to be done unanimously. But it's about, I suppose, pushing as far as the EU can go with sanctions while not touching gas at the moment, because obviously that would be so destructive to European economies. Helena?
Well, our correspondent Shona Murray there bringing us up to date with all the very latest from the heart of Europe. Shona, thanks a lot. US President Joe Biden has concluded his trip to Israel and the Palestinian territories today, meeting both Israeli and Palestinian officials. President Biden called for peace in the region and repeated calls for a two-state solution. Thomas Hill reports now.
He said it to the Israelis and repeated it to the Palestinians. The United States supports the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Joe Biden concluded his trip there in Bethlehem with a message of hope.
There must be a political horizon that the Palestinian people can actually see or at least feel. We cannot allow the hopelessness to steal away the future that so many have worked toward for so long. So even if the ground is not ripe at this moment to restart negotiations, the United States and my administration will not give up on trying to bring the Palestinians and Israelis and both sides closer together.
After months of tension and violence between Israelis and Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority president has reached out to Israel for peace. He asked for justice for the Palestinian-American journalist killed by Israeli gunfire last May.
Regarding the murder of the martyred journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, the murderers need to be held accountable, because the continuation of all that will lead to escalation on the one hand, and on the other hand, the loss of hope for a better tomorrow.
From the Palestinian territories, Biden went directly to Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport, where the Israeli president and prime minister were waiting to see him off. The US president headed for Saudi Arabia with a visit that began with a gesture by Riyadh. It reopened its skies to Israeli airlines.
Plenty more coming up after a short break. Do stay with us if you can. Welcome back. Good to have you along. The UK's Weather Service has issued its first ever red warning for extreme heat, with temperatures there expected to reach up to 40 degrees Celsius for the first time since records began. Now in France, 10,000 people have been evacuated from the Gironde region as firefighters battle blazes in the Landes de Gascogne National Park. Meanwhile, in neighbouring Spain, a red alert has also been issued, with temperatures there hitting 45.6 Celsius in Andalusia and Seville, reaching 44 Celsius earlier this week. Well, joining me here on set is our science correspondent, Jeremy Wilkes. Good to see you, Jeremy. Jeremy, I have to say, speaking for myself, I mean, I really had to try and take it easy coming in to work today. It was probably the right thing to do, actually, because, I mean, this can have really serious health implications, can't it?
Absolutely the right thing to do. And for people who are fit and healthy and young, absolutely, they need to take this seriously as well, because the temperatures we're reaching are a problem for everybody. Now, it does depend on who you are and where you grew up, actually, and that's been proven scientifically. So somebody who grew up in Athens will be better able to deal with this kind of heat than somebody who grew up in Dublin, for example, and that's normal. But yeah, I mean, whoever you are, so, you know, we often hear warnings for the elderly and people with young children. That still applies, but everybody needs to stay hydrated, stay out of the sun. As you said, the UK Met Office offering it forward this advice, saying this is not the moment to go and play in the sun. Don't go and splash around in the sea. Stay in the shade as much as you can. Treat it as you would a kind of storm. You know, if there's a big storm coming in, then everybody knows they need to stay indoors. They need to take precautions. And that applies to things like travel as well, is what they're saying for this weekend and early next week as well. If you don't need to make that journey, then do you really want to go and get on a crowded train and get so hot? You know, maybe you can work from home, find some other way of doing things. And as I say, even for people in their 20s or 30s, when it's getting this hot, when you're getting up towards 40 degrees, it is dangerous for the body. And we've got overnight lows forecast in London of 25. So that means that's the coolest it's going to get. So, you know, if you can, open up your windows at night, try and get some cool air in the house, and then during the daytime, behave as if you're in southern Europe and close blinds, close windows, and just try and keep the cool in.
I think that's really important advice, to also treat this as a severe weather event as you would anything else. Now, I read on Twitter, as one does, someone saying, you think this is hot? Well, this is the coolest summer you're ever going to have for the rest of your life. I mean, I was pretty depressed by that, but I I mean, it's probably true, isn't it?
I don't think we can say that that's definitely going to be the case, but let's say this is a sign of things to come, and there's no sign that it's going to get cooler. So when we talk about records being broken, 47 degrees in Portugal as well yesterday. That's possibly a new outright record for Portugal. In the UK, getting up to 40 degrees, possibly breaking the 38.7 degrees, which was the current all-time high in the UK. The best science that we have, which is from the IPCC, is that we should expect heat waves like this to be more frequent, more intense, and to last longer as we move forwards. And bear in mind that the climate that we have now is the result of emissions that we put into the atmosphere 20 or 30 years ago. So even if we drastically reduce emissions now, we're still going to carry on warming our planet. Maybe you'll get towards the end of the century, and if we've hit all of our objectives, then you'll start to see a kind of leveling off in that curve. But this warming is going to carry on, and so we need to prepare. We need to prepare in terms of how we organise our lives. I mean, in the UK, that's particularly the case because we're not used to it. But, you know, how are we managing electricity demand? Do we send children to school when it's as warm as this or not? What kinds of measures can we take in the office, in the workplace, in order to change rules and allow people to adapt, because we're going to have to adapt. If it's 40 degrees in London, we need to take this seriously. Absolutely,
all vital questions there. Jeremy Wilkes somehow keeping cool enough to bring us that piece of news. Science correspondent, thank you, Jeremy. Well, European law enforcement agency Europol has arrested 11 people in Poland and the UK for smuggling migrants from Belarus into the European Union. Now, according to a statement published today, a cross-border investigation found that a network of Syrian and Turkish nationals lured migrants from Iraq under the promise that they could help them enter the EU via its eastern border. Investigators say more than 600 migrants were smuggled by the criminal network, who paid them between 10 and 13,000 euros to make the journey. And in Germany, a former military officer has been convicted of plotting to kill politicians while posing as a Syrian refugee. Prosecutors labelled the 33-year-old as a radical right-wing terrorist and say that the man was hoping that the attack would be blamed on asylum seekers. His targets include then Justice Minister Heiko Maas and the Jewish head of an anti-racism organisation. Social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, are all failing to stop hate and threats against their LGBTQ+ users. That's according to a report from the advocacy group GLAAD. Well, Sophia in the Cube has the story.
Yes, Helena, LGBTQ social media users believe that these major tech platforms are not a safe space for them. Now, this report was published by GLAAD, which is one of the largest media LGBTQ advocacy groups in the world. Now, the study focuses on these 5 major social media platforms. So we have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. And the study found that over 84% of LGBTQ adults believe that there is not enough being done online to stop harassment and hate speech. So GLAAD graded all of these platforms, for example, looking at features like, do they allow gender pronouns on their user profiles? Do they stop any discriminatory or harmful advertisements? And as you can see, all across the board, all platforms failed, scoring below 50 out of a possible 100, with TikTok doing the worst with just a little over 42 out of 100. And so GLAAD believes that these tech companies aren't being transparent enough when it comes to explaining how exactly they tackle anti-LGBTQ hate speech. So we spoke to Jenny Olsen, who actually wrote this report, and she explained to us that a lot of the times these tech giants choose not to act.
The platforms do have tools that they can use to solve these problems. They choose not to because it also reduces their profits. What's really needed is regulatory solutions and regulatory oversight that will essentially force them to make their products safe.
Now, all of these social media platforms do have policies in place to protect LGBTQ users from harassment, but GLAAD recommends that they go a step further in their recommendations, like, for example, releasing their training methods of the content moderators. And Helena, the group says that these companies must act because online hate can quickly turn into real-life harm.
All right, Sophia, an important story there. Thank you so much for bringing it to us. Well, still to come, remembering the lives cut short by COVID in Spain as the King and Queen pay their respects in Madrid. That's coming up after the break. Welcome back. Good to have you with us. It's been more than 45 years since the death of Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, but the legacy of his brutal regime still looms large. Now, Parliament has passed legislation to ensure his victims aren't forgotten. Hermione G has more.
Spanish MPs have approved a new law that declares the regime of former dictator Francisco Franco illegal and commits the government to preserving the memory of his victims. More than 100,000 people who disappeared during the civil war and dictatorship are still unaccounted for.
Of course, the state recognizes that from the implementation of this law, the remains of the victims of the civil war must be recovered. Who is capable of denying the victims the right to recover the remains of their loved ones? That is what the law establishes.
The main opposition party has criticised the participation of Basque MPs in the negotiations, despite their refusal to condemn murders committed by the Basque separatist group ETA.
You cannot allow the leading figures of terrorism to legislate, and worse still, to write the history of their victims. It is totally indecent.
MPs from the far-right Vox party voted against the bill, saying it further divides the country. The government of Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has made the rehabilitation of Franco's victims a major priority. Hermione G, Euronews.
Well, staying in Spain, and King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia paid their respects to the victims of COVID-19 at a memorial event in Madrid. David Moricant reports.
The Royal Palace has hosted a state tribute to the victims of the pandemic in Spain. The event took place in the Armory Courtyard under the slogan, "An applause for remembrance." Among those present were the President of the government, Pedro Sanchez, all the ministers, state powers, regional presidents and parliamentary representatives. King Felipe VI dedicated an emotional embrace to the families of the victims.
There are many lessons learned during this time that we will not forget. And it is at this moment that we must strengthen everything that the pandemic revealed as relevant and urgent. Greater investment in science, greater international cooperation, greater care for the elderly, greater citizen solidarity, and more solid health systems.
The final touch was the performance of the Antonio Vega song Lucha de Gigantes, performed by Alice Wonder, played in memory of the almost 109,000 people who have died in Spain due to COVID-19. David Moricant, Euronews.
You're up to date. See you soon.